Montana winters were notoriously unforgiving. The wind whipped across the plains with a biting chill that could freeze exposed skin in minutes. Rancher Samuel Hayes had spent his entire life here, learning the land's moods, respecting its dangers, and trusting its rhythm. The hay barn on his property had always been a place of work, storage, and shelter for livestock. But that morning, it would become something entirely different. Samuel had risen before dawn, as was his custom, to tend the cattle. The snow crunched beneath his boots, the sound crisp in the still morning air. His breath puffed out in clouds as he moved, feeding and checking on the animals. Life on a Montana ranch was routine but relentless. Feeding schedules, mending fences, breaking ice for water troughs, and keeping the fire in the house going. Yet as he rounded the corner to the back of the barn, a sound made him pause. At first, it was subtle, a soft, almost imperceptible whimper. He frowned, scanning the dim light through the barn's slats. "Probably a calf caught in the hay," he muttered to himself, trying to dismiss the unease creeping up his spine. But then he heard it again, a faint whimper, desperate and trembling, unmistakably human. Samuel's heart pounded. He had seen animals injured, lost and frightened, but humans crying in such vulnerability was something entirely different. He approached cautiously, hands ready to protect or help as needed, the sound of his boots muted by the fresh snow outside. Pushing open the heavy wooden doors, he was met with a scene that froze him mid-step. There, huddled in the far corner, was a woman, bloodied, bruised, and visibly exhausted, curled protectively around 7 children. The barn smelled faintly of hay, sweat, and something sharper, iron-tinged, blood. The children were pale, shivering violently in the cold, their eyes wide with terror. The youngest, a toddler, clutched the mother's sleeve, crying softly, while the oldest, around 12, stared at Samuel with a mixture of suspicion and cautious hope. Samuel instinctively stepped forward, keeping his voice calm and steady. "You're safe now. My name's Samuel. I won't hurt you. Come with me if you can." The woman's eyes fluttered open, revealing deep brown eyes full of pain, fatigue, and relief. She tried to speak, but could only manage a weak, hoarse whisper. Samuel caught the faint sound of a name, Clara. The children's names came in broken whispers shortly after. Seeing them like this, Samuel felt a mix of emotions: fear for their well-being, anger at whoever had left them in such a state, and an overwhelming urge to help. The woman's injuries were severe: cuts along her arms and legs, bruises on her face, a thin sheen of dried blood on her clothing. She had clearly endured a violent ordeal. The children, though smaller and less injured, were malnourished, dirty, and frostbitten from exposure. He immediately understood that the harsh Montana winter could easily claim their lives if they remained outside or unattended. Samuel's first action was to bring them warmth. He grabbed every blanket he could find, draping them carefully over Clara and the youngest child. One by one, he attended to the others, making sure each child was wrapped, shielded from the icy wind that seeped through the barn's wooden slats. He moved with careful, deliberate motions, gentle but decisive, speaking in calm tones to soothe both fear and pain. "You're safe here," he said softly. "I'll take care of you." The barn, which had always been a place of labor, began to transform into a makeshift refuge. Samuel pulled loose hay from the floor, layering it thickly to form a bed that would insulate them from the cold, hard ground. He checked the stove in the corner, ensuring it was safe to light, and soon the room filled with a gentle warmth, pushing back the chill that had made the children tremble. He fetched bowls and poured water for the older children, warming it over the stove, careful not to spill. He couldn't cook much, but even a warm sip could offer some comfort and a sense of normalcy. As he worked, Samuel's mind raced. How had they ended up here? Who had harmed them, and why? Montana was isolated, but not so isolated that a family could vanish without a trace. It seemed clear to him that they had been running from something or someone, a danger that had left them desperate and exposed. He realized that this was not a simple matter of finding temporary shelter. They would need ongoing care, protection, and eventually, a plan for their long-term safety. Clara, despite her injuries, tried to speak. Her voice was fragile, and she coughed weakly, but she managed to explain that they had been traveling west, hoping to find a new life, and had been ambushed by unknown men along the way. Samuel listened carefully, offering comfort where words failed. The children clung to her, but the tension in their bodies slowly began to ease as they realized that he meant them no harm. The bond of trust began forming in small, quiet gestures. A hand offered to steady a child, a blanket tucked more snugly around shoulders, the gentle hum of a tune to distract from the fear. Hours passed. The barn, once silent except for the sounds of livestock and wind, now carried the soft noises of life, the crackle of the stove, quiet murmurs from the children, and Clara's slow, labored breathing as she rested. Samuel knew that he had crossed a line from being merely a rancher to being a guardian, protector, and lifeline for this family. Every instinct he had learned from a lifetime on the Montana plains was now focused on their survival. By nightfall, the immediate crisis had been managed. The children had eaten a small meal, warmed themselves, and even slept intermittently, though their dreams were likely troubled by the trauma they had endured. Clara had been stabilized as best as possible in the barn, her wounds cleaned and wrapped. Samuel himself felt a profound exhaustion, not from physical labor, but from the emotional intensity of the day. The winter wind outside howled relentlessly, but inside the barn, for the first time since their ordeal began, the family felt a fragile sense of safety. This first chapter of the story is about discovery, the raw confrontation with human suffering, and the moral decision to intervene. Samuel Hayes' choice to help Clara and her 7 children reflects not only courage, but an innate understanding that in Montana, where survival is always uncertain, compassion can become as vital as food, fire, or shelter. The Montana landscape itself, harsh and indifferent, underscores the stakes. There is danger outside the barn, but within, warmth, protection, and hope take root. The story is not yet about resolution. It is about the moment when a man chooses to act, recognizing that his next decisions will shape the lives of 8 people and mark the beginning of a transformative journey for both the family and himself. By the end of this outline, we see Samuel as a figure of moral courage, facing a crisis that demands immediate action. Clara and her children are vulnerable, but alive, their future uncertain, yet holding the possibility of renewal. The tension between danger and sanctuary, despair and hope, is established, setting the stage for the next stage of the story. How Samuel begins to nurture, protect, and bond with the family he found that fateful morning. After the initial shock of discovering Clara and her 7 children in his barn, Samuel Hayes realized that the work had only just begun. The Montana winter was merciless, and a family in their condition would not survive long without constant care. His first priority was to stabilize their physical needs: warmth, food, and tending to injuries. Yet, he quickly learned that survival was only part of the challenge. The emotional and psychological scars they carried were just as urgent to address. Samuel began with the youngest children. The toddler, no older than 2, had frostbitten fingers and was shivering violently, wrapped tightly in a worn blanket. Samuel's hands were rough, calloused from years of ranch labor, yet he handled the child with surprising gentleness. He whispered soothing words, though he doubted the toddler understood, and gently rubbed the little fingers to restore circulation. The child's small cries began to quiet as warmth seeped into frozen limbs. Next, he turned his attention to the older children. They were pale, hungry, and wary, the trauma of recent events etched into their young faces. Samuel offered simple food: warm porridge, bread, and a little milk. Even the act of eating became an ordeal at first. The children were suspicious and timid, unsure if the food was real or if it might be taken away. Meanwhile, Clara's injuries required more care. Samuel had some experience with bandaging and basic first aid, mostly from treating livestock, but he knew human wounds demanded delicacy and patience. He cleaned each cut with warm water, carefully applied ointment, and wrapped the wounds in clean cloths he had salvaged from his own home. Clara winced, but remained surprisingly resilient, her face pale but composed. She whispered thanks between labored breaths, the sound weak but genuine. Samuel encouraged her to rest as he tended to the children, knowing that her strength was critical, not only for her survival, but for the comfort and stability of her family. As the day wore on, Samuel realized that their clothing was wholly inadequate for Montana's brutal cold. The children's garments were thin, tattered, and layered with dirt. Samuel searched his barn and home for extra coats, mittens, and boots, carefully fitting each child as best he could. The process was slow, requiring patience to calm frightened children who had been through a terrifying ordeal. He discovered that small gestures, a snug coat, a hat pulled over ears, mittens tied together to prevent loss, brought unexpected relief. Even something as simple as dry socks or a warm scarf gave the children hope, reminding them that someone cared for their well-being. The emotional dimension of care proved more challenging. Clara was quiet, withdrawn, and haunted by fear. Samuel understood that words alone would not heal trauma. He needed to provide stability and routine. He started by setting small schedules, meal times, resting periods, and simple chores the children could do safely. These routines helped create a sense of normalcy in the midst of chaos. Samuel spent time talking with the children individually, asking their names, their favorite things, and sharing stories about the ranch. Slowly, the walls of fear began to crumble. The children started to smile, albeit hesitantly, and for the first time since their ordeal, they laughed. A small but powerful sign of recovery. Samuel also understood the importance of hope. In the evenings, after ensuring that everyone was fed and warm, he would sit with Clara and the children near the barn stove, telling stories of his life on the ranch, of the mountains, and of the animals they tended. He spoke of resilience, courage, and the harsh beauty of Montana. Though Clara and her children had endured immense suffering, Samuel's presence offered the promise that not all humans brought harm. He was a steady anchor in a world that had been violent and uncertain for them. However, caring for a family of 8 was no small task. The days were filled with physical labor, fetching firewood, hauling water, repairing the barn, preparing meals, and ensuring the children remained safe. The Montana winter was unrelenting, and every day brought new challenges. Snowstorms could isolate the ranch for days, making trips to town impossible. Samuel became increasingly inventive. He used the barn loft for sleeping arrangements, built small play areas for the children to keep them occupied, and even rigged a rudimentary system to melt snow for drinking water. Each small success reinforced the trust between him and the family, though he also recognized that this was only a temporary solution. Long-term plans would eventually be necessary. Clara began to show signs of recovery. Her strength returned slowly, allowing her to assist in caring for the children and performing light chores. Yet Samuel noticed her hesitance, the lingering trauma in her eyes. She had been through a near-death experience and had lost her sense of security. To help her regain confidence, Samuel involved her in decisions regarding the household, listening to her opinions and offering reassurance. Over time, Clara began to smile more often, comforted by the realization that they were no longer alone and that someone had truly risked his own safety to protect them. An unexpected development emerged from the relationship between Samuel and the children. Trust, once fragile, grew stronger through small acts of care. The oldest child, a 12-year-old boy named Henry, initially defiant and suspicious, began helping Samuel with barn chores and caring for the younger siblings. The middle children, though hesitant, followed his example, learning routines and gaining confidence. Playfulness returned in small doses, a game with hay, drawing shapes in the snow, or laughing at Samuel's clumsy attempts to mimic a child's leap into a snowdrift. Through these interactions, the children began to heal emotionally, rediscovering a sense of safety, stability, and family connection. One particularly harsh night underscored the fragility of their situation. A blizzard had swept across the plains, and the wind screamed through the barn's cracks. Samuel stoked the stove constantly, ensuring the fire did not die. Clara and the children huddled together under layers of blankets, trusting Samuel's vigilance. He took turns checking each child and their mother, ensuring no one succumbed to frostbite or hypothermia. That night, Samuel understood that care was not just about attending to wounds. It was about presence, constancy, and reassurance in a world that had shown them danger at every turn. By the end of this phase, Samuel had become more than a rancher. He was a guardian, a provider, and a protector. The barn, once a simple structure for livestock, had transformed into a haven where life, hope, and warmth persisted despite the outside world's brutality. Clara and her children, once on the brink of collapse, began to trust again, opening their hearts to the possibility of a life where they could heal. Samuel's actions were not heroic in the grandiose sense. They were quiet, determined, and compassionate, yet they were enough to create a lifeline, bridging the gap between despair and survival, trauma and hope. This outline emphasizes the critical period after the initial discovery, showing how Samuel's dedication to both physical and emotional care begins to transform the family's fate. It demonstrates that survival in Montana was not only a matter of food and warmth, but also trust, stability, and the power of human kindness. Samuel's choice to care for Clara and her children would set the stage for deeper bonds, unexpected challenges, and the eventual transformation of a family once shattered by violence, into a unit capable of hope and resilience. Winter in Montana was harsh, unrelenting, and isolating, but Samuel Hayes' barn had become a small oasis of warmth and life. Yet he soon realized that the survival of Clara and her 7 children depended on more than his own labor and care. The Montana community, though sparse, had its own rules, suspicions, and prejudices. Samuel's decision to shelter a mysterious woman and her children would not go unnoticed, and navigating the balance between secrecy, safety, and seeking help became his next challenge. By the second week after their arrival, the family's presence in the barn had begun to stir curiosity. Ranch hands, neighbors, and even townsfolk who occasionally passed by Samuel's property noticed increased activity. Smoke from the barn stove, the sound of voices, and children laughing faintly despite the winter wind. Montana was vast, but word traveled quickly in small communities. Rumors began circulating. Some were kind, curious about Samuel's generosity, while others were suspicious, questioning why he had suddenly taken in strangers without explanation. Samuel recognized the potential dangers of drawing attention. He was proud but practical, understanding that not everyone in the region had good intentions. Some might see Clara as a burden. Others might suspect trouble, perhaps thinking she and the children were fugitives, or that there was some hidden scandal. To prevent gossip from escalating into threats, Samuel implemented routines that minimized exposure. Clara and the children were kept inside most of the day, with trips to the nearby creek or woods done only when necessary and with careful planning. Samuel ensured that neighbors saw him working around the barn as usual, feeding animals, chopping wood, and carrying on his daily tasks, masking the true nature of what was happening inside. Meanwhile, Samuel began to recognize the long-term implications of taking responsibility for 8 people. The Montana winter demanded constant resources: food, firewood, water, and medical supplies. Clara, though stronger, could not yet contribute fully, and the children's needs were constant. Samuel's careful planning extended to every detail. He rationed meals for the children, prioritizing nutrition for growth and healing. He taught them to assist with chores appropriate for their ages, from gathering kindling to tending small livestock, instilling a sense of purpose and self-reliance. This not only helped the family survive, but also provided structure, gradually replacing fear with confidence. The emotional stakes were equally high. Clara, while grateful, often expressed fear of the future, worried about the outside world, and mistrusted human kindness due to past trauma. Samuel responded with patience, understanding that trust was fragile. He would sit by the stove for hours, listening to her fears, sometimes offering practical advice, sometimes simply allowing her to speak without interruption. Over time, small breakthroughs occurred: a shared laugh at a minor mishap, a successful meal prepared together, or the children sleeping peacefully through the night. Each victory reinforced the fragile trust between them and strengthened the family unit. As the weeks progressed, Samuel also recognized the importance of integrating them cautiously into the broader Montana community. He could not isolate them indefinitely. The town had doctors, a small school, and resources that might be necessary for the children's development. Yet introducing the family had to be done carefully. Samuel began by subtly making connections. He mentioned Clara's name in passing, sought advice on schooling without revealing personal details, and gauged neighbors' reactions. He was acutely aware that any misstep could bring danger, exposure, or misunderstanding. A turning point occurred when a traveling doctor, Dr. Emerson, arrived at Samuel's ranch for a routine check of his livestock. Samuel cautiously explained the situation, omitting unnecessary details while emphasizing the urgency of medical attention for a woman and children recently exposed to trauma and harsh winter conditions. Dr. Emerson, a kind and practical man, immediately understood the gravity. He assessed Clara's injuries more thoroughly, prescribed medicine, and gave instructions for continued care. For the first time, Samuel felt a slight reprieve, knowing that professional medical guidance had arrived, though the ongoing responsibility still rested heavily on his shoulders. Conflict, however, soon arose from unexpected quarters. Some neighbors, noticing the presence of the family, began questioning Samuel's choices. There were whispers about why he had taken in strangers, why he had not consulted the town, and whether this could bring trouble or scandal. Samuel confronted this quietly, explaining as much as was necessary, demonstrating through actions that the family was being cared for properly. His integrity, reputation, and long-standing relationships in the community helped to diffuse initial suspicion, though the underlying tension remained, a reminder that Montana's harsh environment extended beyond the wilderness into human relationships as well. Within the barn, life settled into a rhythm. The children grew stronger, learning skills that would serve them in the Montana wilderness. Henry, the oldest, became a surrogate helper to Samuel, assisting with chores and gaining confidence that had been absent before. The younger children, while still cautious, began to play in small, joyous bursts, laughing in the hay and snow, their fears gradually fading. Clara, regaining health and energy, started teaching the children small lessons in hygiene, basic education, and emotional expression. Through daily interaction, Samuel witnessed a transformation, from a frightened, broken family to one slowly finding stability and hope. Yet the psychological scars remained. Nights were often the hardest. Children awoke in panic, and Clara occasionally relived traumatic memories, trembling or crying softly in the darkness. Samuel's presence became a constant reassurance. He stayed by the stove, his hands always ready to comfort, his voice steady and soothing. These moments, though emotionally exhausting, deepened the bond between him and the family. They came to rely not only on his practical care, but also on his patience, understanding, and quiet strength. Montana itself, unforgiving as it was, became both a challenge and a sanctuary. The blizzards, freezing temperatures, and isolation posed daily threats, yet they also provided the privacy Samuel needed to protect the family from outside interference. Snow-laden trees and frozen creeks became backdrops to lessons, games, and small adventures. He taught the children to identify animal tracks, to gather firewood safely, and to navigate the rugged terrain. These lessons were not just survival skills. They were methods to instill confidence, resilience, and a sense of belonging in a landscape that could otherwise feel hostile and isolating. By the end of this outline, Samuel had moved beyond initial discovery and emergency care to the complex, ongoing responsibility of integrating a traumatized family into life on a Montana ranch. He balanced secrecy and protection with practical care, addressed emotional and physical needs, and cautiously navigated community dynamics. The narrative emphasizes the tension between isolation and integration, danger and security, trauma and healing. Samuel's role evolved into that of a true guardian, one whose actions were shaped by both moral courage and practical wisdom, ensuring that Clara and her children not only survived, but began to thrive under his care. This stage of the story underscores the challenges of responsibility, the complexity of human relationships, and the slow, often fragile, process of recovery and trust building. Montana's wilderness, as ever, remains an unforgiving yet transformative presence, shaping the family's journey and highlighting Samuel's unwavering commitment to protect and nurture. Life on Samuel Hayes's Montana ranch had slowly settled into a fragile rhythm. Clara and her 7 children had begun to recover physically and emotionally. The barn, once a simple structure for livestock, had become a sanctuary. Yet in Montana, safety was never guaranteed. The wilderness itself was a constant threat. But now, the danger came in human form. Samuel would soon discover that protecting the family was not just about warmth, food, and care. It was about courage, quick thinking, and moral resolve in the face of potential violence. It began with the subtle signs. Samuel noticed tracks near the edge of his property, footprints too large for the children, too deliberate to be random. At first, he dismissed them, thinking it might be hunters or travelers passing through. But the frequency of the signs, the way the snow had been disturbed around the barn, suggested otherwise. Someone was watching. And then, one evening, a distant shout carried across the plains. It was not the wind, it was human. The sense of being observed and pursued sent a chill deeper than the Montana winter ever could. Samuel immediately understood the stakes. Clara and her children were vulnerable. Any confrontation could turn deadly. He called them close, explaining in quiet, firm tones that they needed to stay inside, keep warm, and be ready to move if necessary. Clara's fear was evident, but she trusted Samuel, leaning on his strength for reassurance. The children huddled together, eyes wide, listening to the distant sounds of footsteps crunching over snow and the occasional muffled voices calling out. Samuel knew that his decisions in the coming hours could determine whether the family survived or perished. The threat escalated when a group of men appeared at the edge of the property, their faces obscured by scarves and hats, carrying rifles. They were rough-looking, hardened by the unforgiving life of Montana's backcountry. Samuel immediately deduced that they were searching for something or someone. Perhaps they were the ones who had harmed Clara and her family before they arrived at his barn. Or perhaps they sought to take advantage of the family, seeing an easy target in a woman and her children alone in the wilderness. Samuel acted with decisive calm. First, he ensured that Clara and the children were out of sight, hiding in a loft above the barn, the floor insulated with layers of hay to muffle any noise. He handed them makeshift slings and instructed them to stay completely silent, promising they would be safe if they obeyed. The children, though frightened, trusted Samuel completely, understanding that their survival depended on his guidance. Clara's hand trembled as she clutched the youngest child, but her eyes held a quiet determination. She, too, had survived much already, and knew that courage sometimes meant following another's lead. Samuel then confronted the intruders directly. He stepped into the barn doorway, facing the men with the tall, steady presence of someone unafraid. "This is private property," he called out. his voice firm and unwavering despite the tension that gripped his chest. "Leave now, or you'll answer to me." The men laughed, a harsh, grating sound, clearly underestimating the solitary rancher standing before them. One of them took a step forward, menacing, but Samuel's steady gaze did not waver. He reached for a nearby pitchfork, not as a weapon to strike, but as a symbol of his readiness to defend his home and the family inside. The standoff lasted tense minutes that felt like hours. Snow swirled around the barn, wind cutting sharply across exposed skin, as the men debated amongst themselves. Samuel's mind raced, calculating every possible outcome. He knew that a fight could endanger Clara and the children, but retreating would allow the intruders to claim the family or worse. His resolve hardened. He would not allow harm to come to them. He positioned himself to block the barn entrance, using his knowledge of the structure to control their movements. Every instinct honed from years of ranch work, the handling of animals, the tracking of humans, the reading of subtle cues, was now vital. Finally, the men made a careless move, stepping too close to the barn doorway. Samuel reacted with precision, wielding the pitchfork to create distance. The intruders, realizing they underestimated him, faltered. Samuel shouted a warning, his voice carrying across the snow-laden plains. "Leave now and never return." The sound of the wind and his commanding tone amplified his presence, making him appear larger, more formidable than he actually was. The men hesitated, glancing at one another, unsure whether the solitary rancher could be more dangerous than he seemed. Clara and the children, from their hidden vantage point in the loft, watched in tense silence. Their fear was palpable, but trust in Samuel's guidance allowed them to remain calm. The realization that he was willing to put himself in danger for their sake deepened the bond between them. They were no longer just survivors. They were a family united by courage, trust, and shared vulnerability. After what felt like eternity, the men finally withdrew. Their footsteps faded into the distance, leaving only the howling wind and the quiet aftermath of tension. Samuel waited for several minutes to ensure they had truly gone before descending from his defensive position. He checked on Clara and the children, his relief palpable. They were shaken, yes, but unharmed. The adrenaline gradually ebbed, replaced by exhaustion, yet also by a profound sense of accomplishment. They had faced danger together and survived. In the days that followed, Samuel reinforced security around the barn. He built barriers to obscure visibility from a distance, set up makeshift alarms using string and bells, and instructed the children on safety measures without frightening them. Montana's wilderness was still dangerous, but now the family had a clear understanding of survival, vigilance, and trust in one another. Clara, who had been silent and reserved for so long, began to voice opinions, suggestions, and questions. She contributed to planning, helping Samuel consider ways to make the barn more secure and the family more resilient. The children, too, became more confident, learning to move safely, recognize threats, and respond calmly in emergencies. This turning point in the story underscores the fragility of their safety and the high stakes of Montana life. Survival was no longer just about warmth, food, or medical care. It required courage, strategy, and the ability to confront human threats. Samuel's leadership, decisiveness, and moral courage were tested in a way that went beyond daily care. He had to protect not only lives, but the trust and sense of security he had nurtured in the family. The threat became a catalyst for growth, forging a deeper bond between him, Clara, and the children, while also demonstrating the harsh reality that kindness and compassion in Montana could invite danger from those unaccustomed to seeing virtue rewarded. By the end of this outline, Samuel and the family had survived their first major external threat. The experience solidified their trust in one another, heightened their resilience, and prepared them for future challenges. Montana, still cold and harsh, had proven to be both a place of peril and sanctuary, shaping the characters and defining the strength of the bonds they shared. This chapter emphasizes the courage required to protect the vulnerable, the moral and practical decisions that define leadership, and the profound human capacity to face fear and emerge stronger on the other side. The harsh Montana winter had tested Samuel Hayes, Clara, and her 7 children in ways none of them could have imagined. From the day he discovered them bleeding and shivering in his barn, to weeks of careful tending, and finally, to the confrontation with the men who threatened their safety, the family had endured immense trials. Yet out of adversity came resilience, trust, and a slowly blossoming hope. By the time spring began to creep across the Montana plains, Samuel realized that their journey was far from over. But the seeds of a new life had been planted. With the danger receding and the harshest winter weather behind them, Samuel focused on building permanence into the family's life. The barn, though still functional, was no longer adequate for long-term living. He began constructing a small cabin on his property, simple but sturdy, with multiple rooms to accommodate Clara and her children. He involved the older children in the construction, teaching them practical skills like cutting timber, measuring planks, and basic carpentry. These lessons were more than work. They were tools of empowerment, instilling pride, responsibility, and the satisfaction of contributing to a home that was truly theirs. Clara's health and confidence continued to grow. With Samuel's steady support and the arrival of warmer weather, she could participate more actively in daily life. She helped prepare meals, taught the children basic reading and writing, and tended a small garden Samuel had cleared near the cabin. Gardening became an unexpected therapy. Planting seeds, tending sprouts, and watching them grow mirrored the family's own gradual recovery and transformation. Clara's laughter, once rare, became a frequent sound around the property, reinforcing the sense that life could flourish even after trauma. The children, who had arrived in shock and fear, began to thrive. Henry, the oldest, demonstrated remarkable maturity, acting almost as a second guardian to his siblings. The middle children discovered their talents, caring for animals, helping in the kitchen, and exploring the wilderness safely. The youngest, previously withdrawn and fearful, began to play freely, chasing small animals or laughing at their own reflections in the snowmelt. Samuel often watched them from the porch, feeling a profound satisfaction that went beyond the practicalities of survival. These children, once on the brink of despair, had found stability, care, and love, and in doing so, had transformed Samuel's understanding of family and community. Community relations also began to shift. Initially, some neighbors had been skeptical or even suspicious of Samuel's decision to shelter Clara and her children. Over time, however, they saw the genuine care and effort he invested. Word of his compassion and bravery during the confrontation with the intruders spread throughout the region. Offers of assistance arrived. Some neighbors brought extra supplies, others volunteered help with the new cabin, and a few connected Samuel with resources for the children's education. Montana, vast and isolated as it was, revealed a network of quiet support for those willing to act with integrity and kindness. Samuel, humble as ever, accepted help gratefully, but continued to lead the household, ensuring that the family remained safe and their dignity intact. As spring advanced, a sense of normalcy settled over the ranch. Clara and Samuel developed a deep bond, built on mutual respect, trust, and the shared responsibility of raising a family that was not born of blood, but forged through hardship. Their partnership was practical and emotional. He provided protection and stability. She brought care, empathy, and the softening touch that Samuel's rugged life had sometimes lacked. Their relationship, born from necessity and compassion, evolved naturally, and the children began to recognize her as a figure of authority and love, complementing Samuel's role as protector and teacher. Education became a priority. Samuel arranged for the children to attend a small school in the nearby town, often traveling with them to ensure their safety and help them adjust to the unfamiliar social environment. Clara taught them at home as well, reinforcing lessons and instilling values of resilience, kindness, and hard work. Over time, the children learned to read, write, and calculate, discovering skills that would allow them to build futures beyond the immediate struggles of survival. Samuel watched with quiet pride as their confidence grew. Each success, no matter how small, was a triumph against the adversities they had faced. The ranch itself became a symbol of their transformation. What had once been a place of solitude and labor evolved into a home filled with laughter, learning, and life. Samuel introduced the children to more than survival skills. He taught them to care for animals, recognize edible plants, navigate the land, and appreciate the beauty of Montana's untamed landscape. They explored hills, streams, and forests together, creating memories that were free from fear and full of discovery. Every corner of the property became a testament to the family's resilience and Samuel's steadfast commitment. Yet the most profound transformation was emotional. Clara, who had arrived bruised, frightened, and weary, now smiled freely. Her children, once silent and terrified, now laughed, argued playfully, and helped one another. Samuel, who had started as a solitary rancher, found joy in the bonds he had nurtured. He learned patience, empathy, and the quiet rewards of caregiving on a scale he had never before experienced. The family had reshaped his life as much as he had reshaped theirs, proving that courage and kindness could create profound, lasting change. By the end of the season, Samuel understood the full impact of his choices. He had not only saved lives in the immediate sense, but had created the foundation for a family to grow, heal, and thrive. The barn that had been their initial refuge became a storage and workspace, while the new cabin stood as a permanent sanctuary. Montana, with all its dangers and hardships, had transformed from a place of survival into a home where love, trust, and resilience could flourish. In the final reflection of this chapter, Samuel realized that true heroism did not always manifest in grand gestures or recognition. It was found in quiet dedication, unwavering courage, and the steadfast decision to care for those who could not protect themselves. Clara and her children's transformation, from terror and despair to safety and hope, was the living testament to his choices. Together, they had created something stronger than mere survival. A family, bound not by circumstance alone, but by trust, courage, and the shared journey of overcoming adversity. The story closes on a note of renewal. Spring flowers bloom around the cabin. Children's laughter echoes across the plains. And Samuel watches from the porch, knowing that the winter's trials had forged an unbreakable bond. Montana remains wild, beautiful, and challenging, but within this small corner of the world, life, hope, and resilience thrive. The family that had arrived bloodied, shivering, and fearful had been reborn through compassion, courage, and the unwavering human spirit.